So you've been learning for months, maybe years, and you still don't feel fluent yet. It's not because you're lazy or inconsistent or bad at languages. It's because no one ever showed you what fluency actually means to you. And without that, it feels like you have never reached it, will never reach it. Let's talk about it. So in this video, we're going to talk about fluency, or at least the version of fluency that you've been keeping in your brain, and it's been keeping you from actually feeling fluent enough in the languages that you're learning. So when you define fluency as perfection or native level, you end up studying harder, but you use the languages less. And that's the trap that we're breaking down today. Treat fluency like a final destination, right? Something you arrive at once you sound native level. But fluency isn't a finish line. It's a function. It's using the languages that we're learning. It's your ability to communicate and understand things in real situations, even when it's messy. So if you can order food, if you can message a friend, if you can watch a show and understand enough to follow along, that is fluency. And that's fluency in motion in real time. But the reason that we don't feel fluent enough, there's a couple different reasons why. It's because we, for example, use someone else's definition of fluency. We're using a test definition, a native speaker's definition, or a learner who's learning the same language as us, but has different goals than us. And the second reason is why we don't actually know what fluency means to us other than B2 or C1 or even advanced. We just say fluency and we think everybody understands that. But we, again, have different definitions of what that is. Even our definitions are vague, like understand movies, speak with friends. What movies are we watching? What friends are we speaking to and what are we speaking with them about? Right? The type of movies that you like to watch in those languages will dictate the kind of vocabulary that you have to learn to understand them. The kinds of conversations that you have with your friends will dictate the kind of vocabulary and grammar and details that you want to master. You're not trying to master how to talk about medical science or childhood education. You're trying to talk about your favorite TV shows and the games that you play or the books that you like to read, what you did yesterday, what you're planning to do tomorrow. It's a very different context, and that context matters. You've been taught, essentially, that fluency is something that you arrive at after years and years of progress, and then after that, you're done. You never have to do anything again. But also that the post of fluency, because most people, when they define fluency, is native level or nothing. But it's like that one day you'll wake up and suddenly you'll sound like a native speaker. You'll be extra confident and effortless because you've put in all this effort, and confidence happens. But that idea was never yours. That idea is not realistic. That idea is not actually how confidence works. It actually comes from a lot of our educational experiences because the school system and many grading systems are, one, teaching to a test, but two, it's teaching us to measure our efforts through perfection. So that A plus reaching 100% or nothing, rather than measuring our efforts through progress and knowing that our skills are going to ebb and flow, especially if you're like me and the people that I work with who are studying multiple languages at the same time. That's a whole other realm of learning languages. And so when you hold on to that kind of definition of fluency, it becomes not necessarily a moving target, but it just becomes hard to grasp onto it, right? Every mistake starts to feel like proof that you're not there yet, and it builds the case that you can't do it. Every mistake that we make, every time we fail, every time we don't do the thing, like we watch a movie and we don't understand a single word or a sentence, or maybe a lot more than that. Every time we have a conversation and we misunderstand the context, or we can't actually make sentences like we thought we could when we're, sitting down with a textbook reading, it tells us that we can't do it. And the more that we build the case for that we can't, the more we feel like we actually can't, and you make excuses not to do it, or you just say, well, why am I even trying? And what we need to do is build the case for I can. And that takes action. That case in this context is not built through wishing for it to happen. As much as we would love for that, you have to actually do the work. And so you can't keep waiting for fluency to arrive. It does not exist. So for example, when I was learning Spanish in school, I thought that if I got straight A's in class and passed all the tests, that I would be fluent in Spanish. I'd be able to communicate. I took 6 years of Spanish. If you've watched my Spanish video, you get to hear a little bit about my Spanish experience. But I took 6 years of Spanish. After those 6 years, I could not have a conversation in Spanish. I could barely read a book and talk about it in Spanish. Why? Because I wasn't taught how to study languages. I wasn't taught how to use languages in my life. I was taught how to understand Spanish for test, how to break down what these questions are asking me so that I could answer them and get a high score. I was really good at that. But the moment I finished that Spanish class and I moved on to the next class, it was 11th grade into 12th. I moved on to Mandarin Chinese for my final year, and I forgot everything. And I say forgot in quotes because if you know me, I talk about when you restart a language, you don't really forget all of it. You just have to like get in motion, use it again. It's going to come back to you, practice. But I forgot everything. And there was no possible way that I could actually speak Spanish, read in Spanish, use it. And so it did feel for many years after that like I was starting from scratch, like I was starting over. And in comparison, when I learned Japanese, I knew that I could not stick to just the textbook. I knew that I couldn't just stick to what I was being taught in class, although that whole experience with those teachers was also very different than my Spanish learning, which was also a big contrast for me because Japanese class was taught for using it in your life, whereas my Spanish classes were taught for the test. And that alone, even without me doing anything on my own, had a big impact on my progress, on my ability to use languages. But because I also recognized what was missing, I used Japanese more in my life, like to the point where me and my friends would speak Japanese every day. We would text each other in Japanese. I was watching things in Japanese, reading things in Japanese. My classes in Japanese, in the first Japanese class, we spoke half in Japanese, half in English. This is brand new beginners, by the way. But as we learned more in Japanese, we were required to use, to speak and use the Japanese that we were learning. In Japanese 2, it was almost entirely in Japanese. And by Japanese 3, it was literally in Japanese the entire time. Everything about the class was taught in Japanese, to the point where if you needed to say something in English, you had to ask in Japanese, can I say this? Or like, it really pushed us to explain our thoughts in Japanese. And that was such a complete difference to what I experienced in Spanish. And because of that, because I used it more, because I had a better understanding of what I was trying to use Japanese for, and because I had made my goals, my milestones, my experience personal, that's what made the shift for me to feel more fluent in Japanese in 3 years versus my Spanish of 6 years. So it's not about the amount of time that you spend in a language either. It's really about what you do, not even about how long you do it. Now, is it okay if it takes you longer? Absolutely. Because we're not going to fall down the rabbit hole of learning language in 30 days. But also know that if you are strategic with what you do, fluency is right there. It's going to happen. And so for many of us, when we're thinking about fluency, we feel like I will be fluent when I'm able to talk about deep topics, have deep philosophical conversations without pausing. But honestly, the first time that you order coffee and someone understands you, that's fluency. Someone understood you. But we just don't always recognize that. And you might be doing the same thing too, right? You're living the skill you think you're chasing. Maybe it's not to the extent that you want it to be, but it's there. You just haven't named it yet. And it doesn't feel like fluency because you have this level of fluency created in your head that doesn't match what you hoped for. Your expectations are here and your reality is here. And because of that, you're saying, I'm not fluent yet. So let me give you some strategies on what you can do to redefine fluency so that you're no longer chasing something that's unrealistic, but also so that you're actually making progress and seeing the progress that you want to see in all of the languages that you're trying to learn. Because if you're here, we're probably polyglot or trying to be. So let's make that. But maybe let's take a pause for a second, because maybe you're thinking, but if I stop trying to, correct my grammar, my spelling, and make sure I know enough vocabulary words, like when I stop improving, if I just stop here and say, I'm just going to use what I have, what if I'm not ready yet? I have to be ready yet. I have to be ready first before I can do this. And I get it. I do. It feels safer to stay in the textbook or to stay with your tutor or your class. It feels safer to wait to feel ready, right? Progress is a little easier to measure when you have a test to pass, or when someone gives you the yes or the no, right? When we are able to categorize our skills in reading, writing, listening, speaking, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, according to a test and say A2 or C1, it feels better. It feels like progress when we're able to put what we can do in a box. But what happens is we're putting it in a generic box that someone else made that we don't have any context for. And so even if you look online and someone says what's B2, there's going to be a list of things that the official websites tell you, oh, this is upper intermediate, and these are the kinds of things that you will be able to say. But what does that mean to you? What does that look like in conversations that you actually have, right? Because waiting to feel ready before you start using the languages that you're learning is not fluency, and you're not going to get there without practice. It's an illusion. When you are focusing on the textbook work and that sort of pass or fail of a quiz, it's giving you the illusion that you're fluent. And then when you actually have to use it, the skill's not there. And yes, I'm calling you out because there's so many people who use apps. And I've had tons of conversations on one of my videos on apps. I'm going to put it up here so you can see, where a lot of people are so heavily focused on what app is the best app to use for learning languages and how should I use it? Like, what's the holy grail of a language learning app? When in reality, it's like, well, are you practicing what you're doing? No, you're taking a test. The app is telling you did a great job. You got 100% every single time. So it's giving you the illusion of fluency, but you're not actually there. You're not actually able to use what you've learned in the ways that you want to use them. It's an illusion. And the whole point of learning languages is to use them in your life, right? So fluency doesn't grow from thinking about it or planning around it or preparing. It grows from using it in the messy middle where you forget the word, gesture wildly like I do in all of my videos, and you still get your point across, where you forget a word and you explain it in the language and say, like, does that make sense? Or you explain to someone else, I understand what you said. I just don't know how to say what I'm trying to say, but give me a second. Because even in our native languages, we do that. We're like, wait a second, how do I word this? And people give, each other a lot more grace when it's our native language. Sometimes, so you might know 100 words, but if you never use them, you never read the content that you're trying to read, watch the movies that you're trying to watch, listen to the music that you're trying to listen to, talk with people, actual people that you want to talk with, your brain doesn't connect them. It doesn't connect the information to the idea. It doesn't connect what you understand in your mind to your lived experience. And it doesn't help you to build that case for why you can do this. And building that case is how you build your confidence. That's why many of us, we can study for hours and hours and hours and still freeze up when someone talks to us. Right? A lot of us have trained our brain for recognition. Do I understand when I hear it? Can I understand when I read it? Rather than recall, can I pull the information out of my brain to use it in writing or in speaking? Like, can I actually, in the file cabinet in your brain, can you pull out the right file that connects to this image or this idea or not? And we're not training for connection, for actually engaging in a back and forth, either through text, through thinking about what we're reading, through thinking about what we're watching, through talking with another person. We are training ourselves for answering questions for a test, the same thing that we learned in school. And so here's a shift that I want you to make. I want you to tell yourself this, that progress isn't about how much you know. It's about how much you try and how much you're able to do. Again, even when it's messy, even when it's imperfect. Because when you have an opportunity to use what you've learned and you freeze, you pause, but then you internalize that as failure, because the freeze and pause is going to happen. But if you then internalize that as a failure, you've trained your brain to pause, and you've trained your brain to think that pausing and freezing is failure, is bad. When again, even in our native languages, we're gathering our thoughts, we're thinking about how to say the thing. We're in real time using the language, and we haven't practiced flow, right? Fluency and flow, being able to talk or to explain and give ourselves grace of thinking as we do these things. Like, for some reason, we're just not allowed to think as we talk in other languages. And that's the difference between knowledge and fluency. That's what I want to help you define, because knowledge it's something that sits in a notebook. Knowledge sits in a notebook. It sits in your textbook. But fluency, it lives. It lives in our experiences, in our ears, in our hands when we write, in our mouths when we speak. Knowledge without use is storage. It's not fluency. Not yet, but we're going to get you there. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to literally redefine fluency for yourself and write it down. I want you to ask yourself these 3 questions. The first question is, what does fluency look like, feel like, sound like to me, for me, right? So when I think about fluency in Spanish, when I think about fluency in French, when I think about fluency in Korean, when I think about fluency in Swahili and Swedish or Japanese or whatever language, Haitian Creole, whatever language you are focusing on, and yes, do this for each one. What does fluency mean to me? Because a lot of the people that I work with, they have at least one language where they're like, I actually don't want to speak to anyone in this language. Speaking would be great, but actually, I just want to watch movies in this one, or I just want to read books. Here are the types of books that I would love to read. I have a list of them, or I have topics that I want to explore. I haven't actually found books on those yet, but this is what I want to explore in that language. And that's okay. But a lot of people define fluency in one very rigid way, and it doesn't even match what you actually want. So what does it look like, sound like, feel like to be fluent in that language? The second question I want you to ask yourself is, what do I want to be able to do comfortably? How do I see myself using these languages in my life? If you were today at that level of fluency that you want to be at, what would you be doing? How would you be living your life? Literally sit down and ask those questions. And then finally, based off of those two, what skills actually matter for how I want to use these languages? What are the skills that you actually need to build up? And to what point, to what level, what does it look like? What skills do you actually have to build up to reach that level of fluency that you're saying you want to? You need to work on speaking and listening only, and maybe you don't actually need to focus on reading and writing. Maybe you do need a lot more vocabulary to talk about this topic, but you don't necessarily need a lot of crazy grammar. That you can use very basic grammar to talk about all the things you want to talk about, which is valid and true. You can keep it very basic with your grammar. You can also keep it very basic with your vocabulary, because if you know person, place, thing, you can describe almost anything. And I literally mean the word person, the word place, and the word thing. The thing that you use in the kitchen, the person that works at the store. Like, we do this all the time in our native language. And so every time that you study, once you answer those three questions, I want you to check if what you're doing matches the version of fluency that you defined, not anyone else. Because progress is going to start when your definition of fluency finally matches your purpose. When it finally matches what you're actually doing. Not what you said you're going to do, but not what someone else said you need to do, or you have to do, or you're supposed to do, but what you said you're going to do and what you're actually doing. And this is just the start of the clarity work that I like to walk all language learners through. And what I do for myself, like, I literally have my definitions of fluency, and then I check with those plans and those clarity pieces, like my guiding principles, regularly, because it changes over time. Sometimes you don't actually want to speak the language at all. And then at some point you're like, actually, I do want to talk with, like, I met this friend who speaks French, and now I want to speak French. I don't want to just watch, movies, but I actually want to speak French now. And that shifts, and that's okay. It's being responsive to you and what you need. So if you take nothing else away from this video, I want to give you a little bit of a mindset reset moment. I love to do these. I have whole workshops on them, because you're not behind, especially because you've made mistakes. You're not behind because you've made mistakes. You're not behind. You keep waiting to be perfect. You're waiting for that confidence to hit you. You probably had a lot of fluid moments in the language that you're learning, and you just said, oh, that doesn't count. That's not real. I'm not ready yet. You didn't give yourself enough credit. And so this week, I want you to notice those moments, and I want you to say out loud in your head, whisper it to yourself if you're in public and you're embarrassed to say it. Say, that counts. I was fluent today. I said a sentence and somebody understood me. I asked a question and I got an answer. Did I understand the answer? No. But did I ask the question? Yes. We will get there. It counts because it really does count. And we have to honor that more often than not. And actually, what I tend to do with these kinds of wins is I put them all in a wins tracker. So I'm going to make sure to include that. It's completely free in the comments below this video as well. But if this hits home, if you realize through the course of this video, I actually don't have a definition of fluency. I've just been watching my favorite YouTuber who's learning Japanese too. And I said, yep, I'm going to do that because it seems to work. So if this whole conversation hits home and you're ready, if you haven't already done so, ready to start answering those three questions, like this video. First, do not leave this video without liking it. So I know that you're ready to redefine your own fluency with me, and that other people know that you're in the same boat. And then I want you to tell me in the comments, what's one thing that you can already do fluently? What's one situation, one question? Like, I am really good at telling people to slow down, stop speaking so fast. I'm really good at saying, can you say that again? And then people actually understand me, because it doesn't feel like the progress that we're hoping for, that end goal version of it, but it is getting you there. And the more that you honor where you are right now, the easier it's going to be to get there. You're building that case for I can do it. And in the next video, we're talking about the biggest fluency myths that make you feel not good enough, even when you're improving. So make sure that you're subscribed to my channel so you don't miss it. And if you want help staying grounded with your language studies, making the kinds of progress that you want to see consistently, it starts with a plan. I'm going to put up the video for my planning process, what you need to do before you create the plan. And if you want to get started, you can grab your language clarity blueprint, which is my process for getting that clarity. It's the exact questions that I ask every single person that I work with in order to develop their blueprint for, okay, what are we doing in your language studies? What is the path that you're trying to take? Part of the work that we did here in this video, but a little bit more in depth. It walks you through how to reconnect with your goals, habits, and your purpose so you can study with confidence and actually use the languages that you're learning. And I will see you in the next one. Bye.